Well, one difference between 1973 and today is the real-time data that we have. Searches for the word abortion were especially high this week in metro areas like Madison, Wisconsin, Kansas City, Missouri, and Salt Lake City, Utah, areas where the procedure is now banned. This weekend, Google searches for the question, "Can I get an abortion?" are over-indexing in those states where it is now illegal. Missouri, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Arkansas, Oklahoma, all at the top of the Google Trends data. And Axios reports that the top queries related to abortion right now include, is it illegal, abortion banned states, and abortion pill. Yes, searches for abortion pill are highest right now in red states, including some that have already banned abortion and others that are likely to follow. So this data, it's important. It provides an insight into what people are searching for in the privacy of their own homes, and it's buttressed by local reporting showing the impacts of the bans. It's critical right now to have reporters in states telling these stories. Quote, "The end of Roe v. Wade is one of the most important stories of our lifetime," veteran healthcare reporter Shafali Lufter recently wrote. At its center, she says, the story of abortion is about medical care and what happens when that care is denied. She wrote, quote, "It's tempting to focus on the political battles, but at heart, the new reality of abortion access is about medical care and health equity." Let's analyze the media coverage of this topic now with several great guests. Kate Smith is here. She's the senior director of news content at Planned Parenthood and a former CBS News reporter who covered reproductive rights. Susan Matthews is here, news director at Slate and host of the podcast Slow Burn Roe v. Wade. And Sarah Longwell is here, Republican strategist, executive director of the Republican Accountability Project, publisher of The Bulwark, and host of the Focus Group podcast. Welcome to everybody. Thank you all for coming on. Susan, your podcast is about 1973. It's about those decades ago. Can you compare and contrast the media coverage back then with now amid this never-ending argument?
Yeah, I want to start by saying something about those front pages that you put up. The top headline on the day after Roe v. Wade came down was actually that Lyndon B. Johnson had died, and that took precedent over the Roe v. Wade decision. And actually, the justices knew that what they were doing was going to be a big deal when they announced it, but they had no idea that it was going to be the controversy that it is now. They actually thought, Justice Blackmun said when he was announcing it, things are going to be unsettled for a little bit, but eventually states are going to adjust, and we're going to get back to just accepting this ruling. So I actually think that they'd be very surprised to see the headlines that we've seen this weekend.
That we're back here right now.
Exactly.
Sarah, you've been doing focus groups, including in the wake of the ruling by the Supreme Court. So can you give us a sense from your conversations about how important this news is or is not to the average American?
Yeah, so I did a focus group with swing voting suburban women about a week after the leak. And what was so interesting was, we would ask people kind of an open-ended question. So what issues matter most to you? What's the most on your mind? And very reliably, the answer was the economy, healthcare, the economy, healthcare, inflation, the economy, healthcare. And only a couple people mentioned reproductive rights or Roe. And this was right in the wake of the leak. But when you drill down, when you ask these women directly, how do you feel about Roe being repealed? Even though a lot of them identified themselves as being pro-life themselves, they were very alarmed by what they saw as a government overreach, an attempt to regulate their bodies. And so what I took away from that is that it's not sort of a top-of-mind issue for a lot of these voters unless you're able to make it a high salience issue, unless you're able to sort of prosecute this case, because then people feel very strongly about it. These women felt very, very strongly about it, but it was not top of mind.
Kate, what's your reaction to that? You now work on this issue full-time at Planned Parenthood. By the way, what do you do as a news director at Planned Parenthood?
That's right. What we're doing, and we have an exciting announcement soon, not yet, but what we're doing is we're basically trying to help our patients navigate through what is an incredibly chaotic time for public health. I don't think there's been a larger seismic shift of the way healthcare gets delivered in the wake of this Supreme Court decision. So what we'll be doing is helping our patients navigate through that, understand what their rights are. All those Google searches that you showed, there's a lot of bad faith actors on the internet. I don't need to tell you that. So we're trying to also cut through that as well, because we know on the ground there's, this fight is far from over, right? It goes to the states. So we have a long
Do you feel like
battle.
you have competitors, so to speak, at Christian pregnancy centers who do the same job you do, encouraging people not to get abortions?
Absolutely. I mean, they've been doing this for decades. And let's, let's level set here. Since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, there has been an unrelenting 49-year battle for the news you saw on Friday. So, we're a little bit on our back foot, a little bit, but we're coming out there and we are competing with those people. And, we have the upper hand, right? Because doctors work at Planned Parenthood. They don't work at Live Action.
Susan, let's take a big, broad question here, and I know it's a little bit unfair to be so broad, but do you think the media is slanted in its coverage of Roe v. Wade and all the aftermath? I mean, here's Kate, who worked at CBS, now she works for Planned Parenthood. Is the media as an institution biased on this issue?
I think the media is a lot of different things, but I think the main thing that I would say about this issue in particular is that support for abortion has been consistent basically since Roe v. Wade, and a majority of Americans actually want access to abortion care. And so you get into a situation with the media where there's one side that actually represents a majority view of what voters want, of what Americans want, and then you have a small minority of people who have really, really strong views on this issue, and they've been doing so many things, as you're saying, as Kate has been saying, to make their views the dominant ones, to make their views the ones at the top of Google searches, to influence the Supreme Court, to do all of this. So you have this back and forth.
So think about this in the coverage in the last couple of days. Kate, I see all these split screen images, one person who's cheering, another person who's jeering. I see tears on one side, and then I see celebrations on the other. That 50-50 split, isn't that actually misleading? Isn't that actually distorting?
Absolutely, Brian. That is a complete distortion of the facts that we know about how people feel about abortion access, and specifically the legality of abortion. We know that 8 in 10 Americans want abortion to be legal. So when you put that split screen up of, one person who loves it, one person who hates it, well, that's completely ignoring
Which,
the facts.
to be fair, we are doing right now.
Well, where's your news director? No, I'm kidding you. But
it's all me. It's all me. I choose the videos. But I did this on purpose because I do think this actually is part of the issue. New CBS polling from your alma mater today, abortion in your state should be what? 9% of Americans say illegal in all cases. The rest say either illegal in most cases, legal in most cases, or illegal in all cases. But only 9% of Americans say it should be completely illegal in their state.
And yet, we have states that are doing exactly that. I mean, before the Roe ruling, we saw Oklahoma pass a ban on abortion at fertilization. I mean, how many Americans agree with that? It's ridiculous.
Sarah, how does this sit with you as a Republican strategist, someone who may be more tuned in to conservative media than Kate or Susan? How do you read this?
I think one of the things that I've seen, I've been a Republican for a long time, but ever since Donald Trump, I have watched this Republican Party radicalize and become more extreme. And I think right now there's a number of governors who are the Republican Party candidates in states like Pennsylvania with Doug Mastriano, where they believe in absolutely no exceptions in the case of rape, incest, life of the mother. And I think that, the task for Democrats is really going to be sort of prosecuting that case broadly of extremism against these Republicans, because they are out of step with where sort of the average person is who does want some restrictions on abortions, but doesn't want, total restrictions on abortions. And that's what I see in the focus groups from these swing voting women. The idea of, a total restriction really sits poorly with them.
So 3 more notes about the media coverage of this. First, let's just acknowledge Politico was right. That scoop, the scoop of the century, getting that draft majority opinion, they were right. Number 2, this is really interesting and a big debate inside newsrooms. A lot of guidance went out to a lot of newsrooms this week saying, hey, journalists, be careful. Don't take sides on this. Don't post something on Twitter that you might regret. Did that happen at Slate, for example?
That certainly did not happen at Slate. Slate, I think, does not have that point of view, which I'm grateful for.
Okay, but what do you think of the newsrooms that do? The New York Times and others saying, hey, let's be very careful here to make sure we're being objective in the coverage of this issue.
So as a journalist, I obviously understand the desire to be objective in the sense that's what makes you be trustworthy. I think the other issue here is that when you think about what is happening now and the fact that what's happening now has not happened since 1973, before Roe v. Wade, newsrooms were basically run by men. The reporters were men. They didn't actually face the issue of how exactly to deal with this when it was an issue that
they just caused the problem.
Yes, it's so
all the coverage of this topic, no one ever talks about sex. They don't talk about the men in this story. It drives me crazy. Anyway, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So I just wanted to note that when the action was happening to liberalize abortion rights, it was a time when women were becoming doctors, women were becoming lawyers, and women were also becoming journalists. I talked to a woman who worked at a women's section for the Miami Herald in 1971, and she said that her beat had been the 4 F's: food, fashion, furnishings, and family. And she got assigned a case of a woman who was being prosecuted for manslaughter for abortion, and she was like, this is a real story. I get to approach this like a real story, and I understand it as a woman. She went and talked to OBGYNs. She did her reporting differently. So I think that this idea of like what is objective is a question that we still have to answer.
Kate?
You know, I completely understand why, if you are the dedicated reporter covering this, why you need to have, objectivity both in and outside of the newsroom. It does undermine.
Did you?
Absolutely, I stand by that.
You did?
Yeah, because look, you know how I feel about this. I think abortion should be legal. So I tried extra hard to make sure that I was doing a lot of both sides in my journalism. And Brian, I'll be honest, I look back on some of this, I think I went a little bit too far in giving some of the anti-abortion folks more airtime and a little bit more faith, I think, than they deserved a lot of the time. But to go back to your question, if you're that reporter, it's important. But what if you're not that reporter? What if you're just a random person in the newsroom? And I think what newsrooms need to remember here is that 1 in 4 people, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their lifetimes. So when they are telling their reporters, hey, you can't talk out about this, well, how many of those reporters are there in that newsroom because of an abortion, because they were allowed to have control over their bodies, right? So I think it's, I think newsrooms really need to think about this and think about how, the economic impact of abortion and how unfair it is that they're telling their reporters, hey, like, not for you, you can't talk out about that.
This is the big inside the newsroom debate right now, but what people can and cannot be saying online. Sarah, one more note about the media. Does the press have a giant blind spot about religion? So much of this topic is about religion. It's about a certain, and not all religion, right? Specifically Christianity. And yet I don't hear as much about that in the television coverage as I think maybe we should.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a key to understanding. And I think there's this sense that women are kind of monolithic and that they would all be sort of pro-choice because this is an issue that affects them. But it's funny, in the focus groups, when I talked to women who voted for Donald Trump, they were very conflicted about voting for Donald Trump. One of the #1 reasons that I heard about why they chose to do it is because they were a Christian, pro-life conservative, and that was the kind of thing that kept them voting for Republicans, even when they were very uneasy about sort of all the other baggage that came with Donald Trump. And so I think sometimes when you're not aware of how important that can be to somebody's identity, you can miss why, a woman who you would assume might vote for a Democrat actually wouldn't.
Religion's a big piece of the story. I think we've got to make sure we show all of it, all of these pieces. To the panel, thank you very much. Sarah, please stick around, more with you in a moment. Important note here from the Los Angeles Times before we go to break. Rough treatment of police, rough treatment of protesters as well as journalists by the LAPD. Pretty disturbing the way some of these reporters were treated when they were out covering the protests this weekend. After the break, we're going to have some frank talk about political violence in the U.S., Plus, we are standing by for news from the G7 summit. President Biden expected to speak at any moment.
It's so musty in here.
Everybody
Damp Rid. Drop in the tab, attract and trap excess moisture, eliminate musty odors.
Age-related macular degeneration may lead to severe vision loss. And if you're taking a multivitamin alone, you may be missing a critical piece. Preservision. Preservision AREDS 2 contains the only clinically proven nutrient formula recommended by the National Eye Institute to help reduce the risk of moderate to advanced AMD progression.
Preservision is backed by 20 years of clinical studies.
And it's from the eye experts at Bausch & Lomb.
So ask your doctor about adding